You Are My Sunshine is a 1940s country song written by Jimmy Davis and Charles Mitchell. Davis would go on to serve 2 non-consecutive terms as Louisiana's governor, riding into office on the back of his beloved horse, Sunshine. His political legacy includes the creation of the Louisiana State Sovereignty Commission, an organization which espoused segregationist ideas and used its authority to suppress civil rights activists from 1960 to 1967. Davis's second administration also oversaw the construction of the Sunshine Bridge, which was extremely controversial when it first opened because the finished bridge emptied into a swamp. In 1977, the state legislature named You Are My Sunshine Louisiana's official song, despite its lyrics lacking any and all references to the Pelican State.
I've never liked this song. Some of the verses feel like thinly veiled threats, and I don't find the chorus all that endearing. I'm definitely in the minority here though, because You Are My Sunshine is ridiculously popular. It's been covered by more than 350 different artists, translated into 30-some odd languages, and it inspired the title of Emma Walsh's debut novel, My Sunshine Away. First published in February of 2015, the book follows a nameless male narrator as he recounts his childhood and coming of age in a Baton Rouge suburb during the late 1980s. If you've never heard of Baton Rouge, I wouldn't be surprised. Despite being the state's capital city, Baton Rouge isn't what most people think of when they mention Louisiana. They think of New Orleans and Mardi Gras and coastal erosion and swamp people. We can never undo the damage swamp people has done to our nationwide perception. I stumbled across this book back in the fall of 2018 and decided to buy it because it was only $6 and I'd never read a novel set in my hometown before. Outside of a well-known country song and a throwaway line from Heathers, Baton Rouge is scarcely referenced in pop culture. The most notable piece of literature to mention it is John Kennedy Toole's Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, A Confederacy of Dunces.
The central protagonist of Dunces sees New Orleans as a comfortable metropolis which has a certain apathy and stagnation which he finds inoffensive. But the only excursion of his life outside of New Orleans took him through the vortex to the whirlpool of despair, Baton Rouge.
If you're from South Louisiana, then you understand this implicit dichotomy between the state's 2 most populous cities. Though they're only an hour away from each other, they couldn't be more different. New Orleans is a cultural melting pot. In Baton Rouge, you're mostly just melting. One is a port city, and the other is more of a college town. NOLA is predominantly Catholic. BR worships the cult that is LSU football. That's not to say we don't share commonalities. Both cities have shitty infrastructure, and we're all still a little traumatized from the 2018 NFC Championship game because it was pass interference, damn it. I honestly envy people who can look at either city with rose-tinted glasses because Louisiana kind of sucks. US News and World Report ranked us as the worst state in America twice, and I'm fairly certain we would have held the title for 3 consecutive years if they'd released rankings during 2020. There's a reason Garth Brooks is only calling Baton Rouge. It's not a great place to live. But Emma Walsh seems to disagree. His depictions of Baton Rouge are drenched with nostalgia, and his fondness for the region is evident in every paragraph, but the novel's flowery prose isn't what stuck with me after I finished this book. There are plenty of things to critique in My Sunshine Away. The story meanders, and to say the supporting characters are paper thin is a severe understatement. But the novel's worst problem is its central plot point, because the metaphor Walsh tries to craft around it is fundamentally broken. Small tragedies befall the narrator throughout the book. His father leaves, and his older sister dies in a car crash, but the event he fixates on is the unsolved rape of his neighbor and childhood crush, Lindy Simpson. To call it a crush feels inappropriate because his behavior is obsessive enough for him to become one of the 4 official suspects in the investigation of her assault. Even though he's innocent of the crime, there's something perverse and disturbing about the narrator's constant fantasies of her. Some moments are quite difficult to stomach. I considered abandoning the book at several points, but I forced myself to keep reading. Not because I cared about these characters or because I needed to know how it ended. I needed to know why this book existed. What was Walsh trying to say? Why was he so determined to write this specific story? The answer is Chapter 28. Chapter 28 is the reason why this book exists. Chapter 28 is the reason why this video exists. Chapter 28 brings the already slow-moving narrative to a screeching halt. It's awkwardly wedged between a scene where the narrator and Lindy have phone sex and the official introduction of our 4th and final suspect. This chapter is solely dedicated to depicting the dichotomy between Baton Rouge and New Orleans through comparative lens of a very real natural disaster. And it's here where the novel completely falls apart. In 2005, Hurricane Katrina barreled through the Gulf of Mexico and left a wake of destruction in its path. The storm surge caused 53 separate levee breaches and plunged 80% of New Orleans underwater. It was the costliest natural disaster in the history of the United States, the deadliest hurricane in nearly a century, and it permanently changed the fabric of Louisiana. So how does Walsh frame this event in his novel?
And though I feel close to that disaster, although I was forever affected by it, and although I truly love and care about that great city, her story is not ultimately mine to tell. I understand that. Baton Rouge's, however, is. Nearly overnight, our population doubled. Schools overflowed, property values skyrocketed, and restaurants opened like flowers. Our po' boys, New Orleanians let us know, were not as good as theirs. Our traffic to these people who were causing it was intolerable. There was no place to get a decent omelet, we were told, though we'd been breakfasting happily for years. There was nothing fun at all to do in Baton Rouge, they explained, and we agreed, because our best theaters, malls, and bowling alleys were now overrun from all the new people in town. Our casinos, our amusement parks, our zoo were depressing.
He's complaining about traumatized disaster victims. How dare these displaced people dislike the place they had to evacuate to while their homes sat under 12 feet of water? How dare they cause traffic and reveal our statewide inability to grasp the concept of urban planning? How dare they point out how crappy our zoo is? And somehow, that's not the worst thing about this chapter.
Lindy always reminded me of New Orleans, although together the two of us never stepped foot there.
The narrator is equating himself to Baton Rouge and Lindy to New Orleans. He's framing himself as a fellow victim when the tragedy is in no way, shape, or form about him. In a transcribed interview with Matthew Thomas, Walsh reveals that he was most protective of Chapter 28 during the editing process.
The chapter on the relationship between Baton Rouge and New Orleans is, to me, one of the most crucial in the book. It's not only an extended metaphor about the narrator and Lindy, but also critical in terms of understanding the setting, the reason the narrator is talking, and the strange idea of legitimate versus illegitimate pain. It became one of the only chapters that I would not allow to be removed from the book, no matter what. The narrator understands that Katrina and its effects on New Orleans is incomprehensible to anyone outside of it, in the same way that the crime against Lindy is incomprehensible to anyone but Lindy. However, to think that large and obvious disasters are the only ones worth looking at, the only ones doing damage, is a mistake.
Walsh is not ostensibly incorrect. Small disasters are worth examining and dissecting, but when the framing device of your entire novel is a larger scale disaster that doesn't apply to the narrator, then that also feels like a mistake. If you don't read this interview, you won't walk away with the impression that the narrator understands the difference between legitimate and illegitimate pain. Only on the novel's last page does he admit that life is not always about him and the unloading of his conscience.
The story of Lindy's rape is about Lindy, and that is all.
But it's not. The final twist in My Sunshine Away is that the narrator has been recounting all of these events to his unborn son.
I want the two of us, together in this world, to be good men. And when I tell you that I love you, I want so badly for you to understand what I mean.
It's an admirable aspiration, but it's introduced 303 pages too late.
This metaphor has bothered me for 4 years because it feels tone-deaf and ignorant on so many levels. The storm itself decimated the city of Biloxi, destroying 90% of the buildings along their coastline. In fact, all 82 counties in Mississippi were declared disaster areas, but their suffering is hardly ever acknowledged in narratives about this particular hurricane.
Katrina was such a horrible disaster in New Orleans because it pushed existing systems past their breaking points. The man-made levees broke. The local and federal governments failed to respond in a timely manner. The devastation disproportionately affected African Americans, who were then denied the ability to advocate for themselves during the process of rebuilding. Walsh doesn't bother to mention any of this because these facts don't fit with the narrative he wanted to tell. Lindy's assault and Hurricane Katrina are treated like set dressing for the novel's main theme, the loss of innocence. Walsh took the lyric, "Please don't take my sunshine away," and repurposed it for an epigraph, "Please don't take my innocence away." Everyone can point to a time when their worldview became darker, when the magic of childhood wore off and the senselessness of reality set in. It's a common trope in literature, most notably present in books like To Kill a Mockingbird and The Catcher in the Rye, but I've always found this subject matter odd. In many ways, innocence is a social construct unique to the human experience. Our endless fascination with this concept implies that disillusionment is inevitable in this world. We'd all like to return to a simpler way of thinking and being, but knowledge isn't just a burden, it's a responsibility, one that we cannot and should not shy away from. The prelapsarian concept of innocence is a lie. Those simpler times we like to idealize never actually existed. We just lack the cognitive awareness to understand nuance. I keep coming back to this particularly frustrating quote from chapter 28.
It was time for Baton Rouge to grow up. The city would need to be reorganized. All 2-lane roads turned into 4, entire intersections scrapped and re-engineered, trees cut down to widen a boulevard. The world is not as simple as football games on fall Saturdays or a bunch of friendly people being friendly. Life in a real city is difficult and complicated, and terrible things happen to wonderful people.
Baton Rouge didn't grow up because of Hurricane Katrina. Baton Rouge didn't grow up at all. This city is still a political and economic quagmire. Those widened highways still aren't wide enough. Our beloved flagship university has a recent and prolific history of covering up sexual harassment, sheltering rapists, and violating Title IX at every turn, but no one cares because the LSU football team beat Alabama this year. Suffering in the real world isn't poetic. A significant portion of New Orleanians never returned home. They lost more than just innocence. They lost their houses and their neighbors and their pets and their way of life. But no one is defined by the tragedies they experience. The impulse to simplify a complex story is human nature, but it doesn't make reality easier. The only person who can tell a victim's story is the victim themselves, and only they get to choose how to define themselves moving forward. I try to stay away from hyperbolic claims because hyperboles are rarely genuine. They're an oversimplification of complex topics, but this novel also oversimplifies complex topics. So when I say that this metaphor is a failure, I want so badly for you to understand what I mean.